from Florida has this question. What are your thoughts on the Enneagram? Is it a subtle New Age instrument that's infiltrating our churches with permission? So there's a lot of... It's been an interesting study for me thinking about the Enneagram, because I've done a lot of study in this whole spiritual direction movement and the contemplative prayer life. I've had a real heart for the contemplative prayer movement for a number of years. And you start getting into that, you're going to find some people that talk about spiritual direction. And one of the tools that's becoming more and more popular is the Enneagram. So the question is, how did it actually get started? It actually got started in the 50s and 60s. There's a couple different guys that had done some interaction with one another, and they were in South America, and they'd been studying some alternative spiritualities. So the one guy he was a psychiatrist, but he'd been studying in Buddhism and Hinduism and Confucianism and Christianity. He'd grown up Jewish, and so he'd studied a little bit of Judaism. He'd studied a little bit of Islam, and he kind of put it all together and was trying to figure out ways of helping people reach enlightenment. And adding in some psychiatric stuff, or some, I guess, more psychologist stuff. Psychiatric is more about the medicines, where psychologist is more about the thinking and the processes. Bringing in some of his training from that arena, he took this old diagram of 9 different points, and he put it together and made it into a personality, quote, profile. And so each of these 9 points, so Enneagram, Ennea is 9, gram is points. Each of these 9 points are different types of personalities. And so you can take a series of questions that will help you discover which of these points, according to this process, which of these points really describes your personality. And then based on that, you have a positive and then a negative point. So there ends up being 3 points. So you have your positive. So if you're at a place of peace, if you're in a good place inside of yourself, you're going to tend towards this positive personality because of your primary personality. Or if you're under stress and things aren't going as well, you're going to tend to go towards the negative side, the negative type of personality. And so this helps you to understand, one, how you're interacting, when you're in peace, when you're not in peace, so that you can press into it. So its source, its origin really is this mixture of all these spiritualities. But in and of itself, it doesn't really have a spiritual point to it. It's kind of like a personality test. So is it New Age? Yes, it was created as a New Age tool for the New Age. But what happened is some Christians began to bring it in and began to use it. There's some pointing back towards a 4th century mystic. He was one of the Orthodox Desert Fathers, and he had done some things on our personality types and how it caused us to search after the Lord or not search after the Lord. And it was not the Enneagram. But that was one of the sources that this guy used when he added in the Confucianism and the Buddhism and the Islam and all the other pieces. He added in a little bit of this mystic's writings to bring it all together to get his understanding that he then began to use. And so there were a lot of Christian people that began to take this, and especially the idea that it came from this 4th century Orthodox Desert Father, which it didn't really come from him. He was helped to orient some of the thinking, but he didn't talk about the 9 points, and it was nothing close to what we would call the Enneagram today. And it became a very popular thing, especially through a writer that's become very popular in the spiritual direction movement, if you will, whatever we want to call this, contemplative prayer movement. But there's aspects of contemplative prayer that would not necessarily agree with some of the spiritual direction and so on and so forth. But in that area, one of those writers, whose name is Richard Rohr, he's written a lot about the Enneagram and some other things. And he's a very popular writer. He's a Catholic priest, Catholic monk, Catholic priest. And he does a lot of writing on the contemplative prayer life, the inner life, the spiritual life. But Richard Rohr mixes in a lot of non-Christian thoughts in with his Christian thoughts. So he uses the language of the church because he is Catholic. But his belief system is not even Orthodox Catholic, much less Orthodox Christianity. He wrote a recent book on the Trinity, where the understanding of the Trinity is that God can be found in the connection between two people. So let's say me and you connect, and we have this connection because there's a unity that happens, and we can feel that connection. We feel that sense of joy, that sense of belonging, that sense of love that comes from that connection. That is God. Now, obviously, that is not God. That has nothing to do with Christianity. I read another one of his books. I can't remember. I think it was called Falling Upward, where he's talking about Christianity and he's talking about God, and he mixes in all these other gods with Christianity and begins to actually pull out Christ from the gospel, where the God that he talks about is not the God of the Bible. So you have this mix that has definitely been brought in. So the question that you have is, one, Enneagram. It's a tool. Is it inherently evil? That's a really good question. I heard about the Enneagram before I studied it, before I looked into it, and I did a couple of the tests. And what I found interesting was, just a couple months apart, I took the test 2 different times and I came up with 2 different answers. So it's not an accurate test, and both psychologists as well as some spiritual directors have thrown it out just because of its inaccuracy, because it's not, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not repeatable on a regular basis. There's some principles there and there's some helpful things. But is it merely a tool, or is it inherently evil? I just from what I've seen from itself, the Enneagram questions and the understanding of 9 personality points, and you tend towards these positive things, you tend towards those negative things, that there's nothing inherently evil in that. It's just a way of understanding the psyche or the soul. It's another form of psychology that doesn't have its foundation in Christian beliefs, but it's just describing the human experience. So is it inherently evil? I don't think it's inherently evil. There's nothing in it that is inherently spiritual. So you could use it like you would use any other psychological method, the DISC profile or the Myers-Briggs scale or any of those other types of personality tests that are there. They can be helpful to understand give us some language for how it is that we're interacting and the things that we do, but there's nothing inherently good or inherently bad in it. And one of the things you have to be careful with is you don't want to start to think, well, because this is how I tested on this personality, this defines me. It doesn't define you. Jesus Christ defines you. It may help you to understand where you're at right now, but understanding where you're at right now is only as helpful as it is to know where you're going. So when you're trying to figure out how to get somewhere on a map, you start with finding out where you are, but you don't end there. You don't I found out where I am at, and so now I don't need anything else. That is your starting point to go towards the goal. So is your goal to be more Christ-like? Whatever it is that helps you to understand where you're at right now, that can be helpful if you use it to then respond to Christ and move towards there. So there are some things that are inherently evil, but I'm not sure that the Enneagram is inherently evil, but I also don't think that it's necessary because of its roots, because of where it is, because many of the writers that are the foundation for what is being taught about it actually come from this New Age, this universalism, like there's many different paths that all lead to God. And it's about the realization of who you really are and becoming your full self. And it's not about the cross and surrender fully and completely to Jesus Christ. I don't think that it's a necessary thing, but there are some very committed and devoted followers of Christ that use it as a tool, and it's merely a tool to help people respond to the presence of Christ. And if it's causing people to respond to the presence of Christ, not necessarily a bad thing. So I'm not going to give you a law, don't use it or use it. But as for me, I'm probably, I found it interesting, I found it curious, but it's not something that I'm going to be studying to try to understand anymore, just because the roots being there. I would rather have something that I know is fully Christian and fully devoted to Jesus Christ. But you have to make your decision for yourself. So, Lee, thank you so much for your question, and we'll see you guys on another Fireside Chat soon.